Antonio Reeves going to the Hornets is not a mistake by the Pelicans, but a sign that things are very, very different. I'll explain in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, plus another way to add a bigger salary player to the roster. It's the Thursday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider Credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Thursday. And I want to get into Antonio Reeves signing with the Charlotte Hornets. Did the Pelicans make a mistake there? Plus, more traded player exception talk. This is a long shot for New Orleans, but it's a way that they can get creative with the roster and the financials available to them. And then let's talk about Jordan Hawkins and what his role could be this season. So we got a lot to cover in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. So the big news relating to the Pelicans today is that Antonio Reeves, second round pick from last year with them in Summer League, and you could argue one of their better Summer League players, is signing a two-way contract with the Charlotte Hornets. The Charlotte Hornets are actually waiving one of the guys on a two-way to make room and sign Antonio Reeves. And after looking pretty good for the Pelicans in Summer League, I don't want to say like exceptional, but looking good enough, and after playing real NBA minutes last season for a team that was injured, where he didn't really deal with a ton of those type of injuries, is this, a mistake for New Orleans? And I don't necessarily think it is. Truthfully, I would not classify this as a mistake, that waiving him was a mistake or anything like that in the first place. But it is a sign that things are massively changing. Look, in 44 games as a rookie last year, 15 minutes per 6 starts, he averaged 7 points, 1.4 rebounds, and about an assist per game while shooting almost 40% from three here. If you look at it per 36 minutes, that comes to 16.6 points per game, 3.4 rebounds, 2.1 assists, 1 steal, and making almost 3 threes per 36 minutes. I use per 36 minutes because in the past, it's not quite the same anymore. That used to be like the average number of minutes that a starter would play. So it's a way of comparing apples to apples, with guys kind of playing smaller minutes and what it would look like, if you gave them a larger role. All those numbers pretty good for a team that could use some depth, particularly at the guard position, on the wing position. Was waiving Antonio Reeves a mistake? And look, I don't think it was. When you look at this Pelicans team going into next year, where was Reeves going to exactly fit in? When you look at the backcourt, right? Jordan Poole is almost certainly going to be a starter. Fears could be a starter. You have Jose Alvarado there as well. You have Micah Peavy, who's more of a two-guard than a wing, let's say. And when you start to look at it like that, and that's not even counting DeJounte Murray's eventually going to come back. You can play Herb at the 2. It looks a little crowded there. And I think the Pelicans, if they want to add to that group, have wanted to add more of a point guard than anybody else. And look, that's not what Antonio Reeves is. He's not a point guard. He's a scoring two-guard, off-ball two-guard. Now, I was very high on him. I would have loved to have seen him stay here in New Orleans, but I don't necessarily think it's a mistake. Someone who averaged under 7 points per game, who was not going to probably be in the opening night rotation to start, waiving that guy and clearing some salary to give yourself a little bit more flexibility and a roster spot, I don't think is the worst thing. If you look at available two guards, I think you can get someone that would give you at least similar or better production, to Antonio Reeves on a veteran minimum deal. So it ends up kind of being, the same here, I think, a little bit. If you're looking for more defense, right, there's Gary Payton The second as well that I think could be a better option there is Russell Westbrook that can give you certain things, right? All of those are, kind of where the team stands right now. You have Alec Burks, who I think you could go and get as well. They're going to give you similar production to Antonio Reeves would. So, if you want to have that roster flexibility right now, I think that is the smart thing to do. And we'll talk more about that coming up here next. But overall, what this says to me is this is just a bigger change, right? Like this is Joe Dumars and Troy Weaver wanting to absolutely turn over the roster and just make things different. This is them looking at this team last year and going, it wasn't just injuries. The team wasn't good, I think. When you look at who's going to be playing heavy minutes for the team, to start the year, a ton of them are new guys, right? Jordan Poole, Kevon Looney, Jeremiah Fears, Derek Queen, Sadiq Bey. You could even throw Micah Peavy in there, though what his role will be, I'm not entirely sure. They've turned over about like half of the rotation or so right now. That's 6 players that should be getting minutes and in the rotation to some degree. That's a lot. They did not believe in this roster, and they really want to kind of break ties from what came before. And it takes a little bit to be able to kind of turn it all over here. And that's what you're seeing them really do. You're seeing them just kind of get guys they like more than what was done before. I don't think they've really loved what David Griffin did here in New Orleans outside of some things like, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, maybe to a lesser degree, DeJounte Murray as well. It remains to be seen what they feel about Yves Missi, I think, and that's kind of interesting. We don't know how they feel about Carlo Makovic either. Jose Alvarado, Jordan Hawkins, who we'll talk about a little bit later, they're changing things. That's the way I've been telling y'all Joe Dumars' job to come in is to mix things up and change things. Now, are they making the right changes? I don't know, but they are certainly following that be aggressive, make changes mindset that they really want to be operating with because they look at last year and go, yeah, that wasn't good enough. Now, that team could have been good if healthy. Like, who really knows? It's impossible to really evaluate this team, in my opinion. So they're making some changes, keeping some of the core guys, adding to it, and we're going to see where it goes. And there will be more changes coming from how all of that plays out too, I think. But this is look, we could hand wring over Antonio Reeves. Like, he showed some potential. But guys that are kind of in the end of the roster, and look, second-round picks in general likely don't plan out. So having the flexibility for an open roster spot to just get a guy that you think makes more sense for the team, whether that is a Russell Westbrook, right? Whether that is, another center or a Bol or a Chris Boucher or an Amir Coffey on the wing, those guys would all contribute more than Antonio Reeves will, and the Pelicans have the ability to go and get all of those guys, potentially at least, right now. So getting rid of Antonio Reeves, him going to another team, look, it's not like he is on an active roster. He's signing on a two-way, which kind of tells you, where he kind of stands around the league. If he was that good, someone would have picked him up and put him on the active roster, I think, and he wouldn't have just settled for a two-way deal. Look, I hope he does well. I don't think it's, even if he does well, I don't think it's going to be much of a difference maker for New Orleans here because I just don't think he would have been playing that kind of big role on this team next year. And right now they're kind of looking for guys they feel are going to help them win immediately. And, he's a second-year player who's from the second round. The likelihood of him helping you win games is smaller. He had a couple of breakout moments last season. Again, the three-point shot looked good, but if he wasn't part of the plans, he wasn't part of the plans. If the Pelicans were going through a rebuild, I would hate this decision. Develop young guys, see what you have in them. They, did not do that with Antonio Reeves here. But that doesn't mean it's a mistake to let him go if you want to have that extra open roster spot or salary cap flexibility because things are a little bit tight there when it comes to their salary cap sheet. Speaking of that, let's get a little creative and try and add bigger name players, higher salary players to this roster to try and improve. I've got a couple of names the Pelicans should probably consider and look at. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, so whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. So if you're already following the action, why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Look, I love it for baseball right now. Make those regular season games way more interesting, even better if you're there in person watching it. You can get in on the golf action. Is anyone ever going to stop Scotty Scheffler again? Probably not. So you can make some money that way. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and you're going to get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. All you have to do is open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Again, just bet $5 if you're a new customer and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins over at FanDuel.com. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And for your second listen, it's Locked On Saints. Training camp has started. How's Tyler Shook looking? How's Spencer Rattler looking? Ross Jackson of the Locked On Saints podcast is going to tell you who QB1 is going to be, giving you all the updates from training camp that you want to know. He's there covering it. He's going to be out in California too, which is awesome to see. Go make Locked On Saints your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget, you can watch Locked On Pelicans on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every weekday at 10:30 a.m. Central Time. If you got an office, a doctor's office, so any sort of office with a lobby or a TV in the break room, but on channel 7.1 if you're in New Orleans, if you got an antenna there, and make sure you've got all the Locked On shows playing. Let's get a couple new everydayers here. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. What do you think about the Antonio Reeves move? Do you think it's a mistake? Do you think it's just type of guy that's like in the league and doesn't matter? That's kind of more how I feel about him, especially if this team's trying to win some games. And if they're trying to win some games, they are, you're going to need to beef up certain areas of this roster, right? Certainly the big man spot, I think, is really where the Pelicans need to try and add, someone else beyond Kevon Looney, who's going to be good for 15 minutes per game. His body is not quite where, if you watched him play last season, it was not particularly great. They need to add another center. Misi at times has looked good, but at times doesn't. Derek Queen, maybe will be ready to start the season. We're not entirely sure either, right? Like, that's not great. So what can this team do? One of the things I've talked about, and we talked about it a little bit the other day, is those traded player exceptions, where you could just absorb someone into the traded player exception. And we were kind of using the luxury tax cap as the threshold for New Orleans to not go above. So that's about $4.2 million. They literally cannot go above the first apron, which they're about $6 million from. But they have two traded player exceptions, one from the Brandon Ingram trade, which is going to expire on February 26th, or February 6th, that'll go away. Then you have one for the Kelly Olynyk deal with CJ McCollum and the trade for Jordan Poole with the Wizards. That one's good for basically a year till, start of free agency next season. So you have two $13+ million trade exceptions. One's like 13.1, one's 13.4. Let's just use 13.4 as the number because they're not going to use both of those in any capacity, right? And again, a traded player exception is just something that's created when you send out more salary than you're bringing back in, and it allows you to absorb a contract into that. You still have to trade something in return. It can be a second-round pick or a protected second-round pick, what have you, but it's a way to get a player without giving up a player, in a sense, when you're over the soft cap, which is when, the salary needs to more or less match. So even though the Pelicans can't go above the first apron, that's $6 million, let's look a little bit beyond that, I think, because you can get creative and trade away a guy and lower some salary, right? Like Jose Alvarado, not that I want him to be traded, he is someone that could easily be moved and get you something without bringing salary back in return. So he kind of fits into, some of what we're talking about here, I think. So they have options to try and go and get somebody, I think. And let's see let's look at a couple of names here that I think they could try and go and get that make a lot of sense for New Orleans. So let's start with kind of big men. So here's what we're doing. We're looking at players making less than $13.4 million. And I think The first name that jumps out to me here that I'm going to say no on this one is Mitchell Robinson. His expiring deal fits into that traded player exception at $13 million. So he's just inside there. Look, he could be a great rebounder, a great rim protector. The problem is injuries, right? 17 games last season, 31 the year before that, 59 the year before that. I get the local New Orleans ties and everything here, but this is just, you can't go after an injured guy like that. He's going to be up for a new contract. That's not great. I don't think you're going to, I don't know what he's going to end up making next season. But if you're looking for some rim protection, he'd be the guy to try and go and get, especially if you didn't give up much to go and get him. If New York just wants to dump him, then it's worth taking a flyer on him. You'd have to give up someone like Jose Alvarado or Jordan Hawkins, who we'll talk more about in a little bit here. But that is, a player that you could try and target a little bit. Just the injury concern, very real for a team that, you don't want having injury concerns with. Speaking of injury concerns, another, this is kind of what you're getting here. It's damaged goods with a lot of these players. Robert Williams, who is on Portland right now, 20 games last season for them, 6 the year before that, 35 the year before that in Boston, right? That's not a good run here as you're looking at 61 games over 3 years. But and he's an undersized 5 as well. This is someone who's 6'9", springy, right? Can show off a little bit of blocking shots, and he's done that. Not an elite rim protector, but certainly above average. He's a very good defensive rebounder too. If you want a guy that you feel more comfortable playing more minutes to, I think he's someone that could be in the 20 to 25 minute range on the high end. He's maybe worth looking at here. Does he fit in Portland when they've got Hansen Yang and Donovan Clingan is kind of their big men of the future? Probably not. He's making $13.285 million next year, so he fits right on into that. Would a second round pick get it done? Probably. You then need to shift a couple of other things on the roster. And again, the injuries are very much a big concern here, but he's someone that feels like he would get minutes on the Pelicans no matter what. 2 more big men that I want to look at here for y'all, because I think this is where things can get interesting. There's actually a couple more that we'll throw out here. The guy I would be trying to go and get that I think makes the most sense, that should be at least somewhat gettable. He might be one of the tougher ones here, and that is Goga Bitadze from the Orlando Magic. They have a ton of centers, and they're going to be healthy next year. Where does Bitadze fit in? 42 games starting last year, but he's more of a backup for them, I think, than anything else. But he is a very good defensive rebounder. He's not really a rim protector. He's probably slightly above average. But again, he should be attainable, in my opinion. He's making $8.3 million next year. It declines the year after that at 7.6. That's kind of, a good thing for New Orleans. 7.2 points per game, 6.6 rebounds per, along with about a block per game per 36 minutes. What are his numbers here? 12.6 points, 11.7 rebounds, 3.4 assists, and 2.5 blocks per 36 minutes. Those are all pretty good numbers, in my opinion, and wouldn't hate to see him on the team. He's the guy you're going to have to give up the most to try and get, I think, which isn't ideal for New Orleans. You don't want to be giving, in my opinion, tons of future assets for like a borderline starter, a surefire starter, or a borderline all-star. Absolutely. But Bitadze could be a good buy low candidate for a team that's just a little bit crowded there in Orlando and maybe needs to offload a guy or mix up some of their salary and cut some here, because that's going to be a pretty expensive team in the near future. A couple of other names to maybe keep an eye on that could be interesting, and one of them, these both might surprise you. Ousmane Dieng from the Oklahoma City Thunder, former first-round pick from a couple of years ago, NBA champion now, just not getting tons of minutes there in OKC, but someone whose advanced statistics show, a below-average rebounder, but guy that could be, pretty interesting here. He's a big man, right? If you want to take a flyer on someone that they just might be looking to dump, 6'10", former lottery pick, could make some sense. 4 points, 2.2 rebounds last year. It's not much of a rim protector, but could he develop? Could he be what you need? Maybe. I think that's just too much of a developmental play that I wouldn't love that idea. So he's really not someone that I would be going after. A player that if you want to kind of take a chance on an injured guy, I think makes the most sense because it would be super cheap, would be Dario Saric, who's currently with the Sacramento Kings now after being traded for Jonas Valanciunas. Tons of injuries the past couple of years as he's really fallen off, particularly last season where he only played 16 games, but did play 64 the year before that. And the year before that was 57 games. You know, his numbers, when you look at him, he is a slightly above average rebounder, which I think is an important thing. He is like not a shot blocker at all, but if you just need a backup center that can maybe rebound for you and has some size and potential to shoot the three ball a little bit, he's shown the ability to do so. 36% in his 8-year career. Maybe it's Dario Saric. That'd be a name to keep an eye on. One other player I want to throw in here that I'm not going to spend time on because we're looking at bigs right now because that's where I think the Pelicans need to kind of be is Jaden Ivey. You know, is he on the outs in Detroit? I don't actually, you know what? Let's talk about him a little bit in the context of Jordan Hawkins. It's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. For your second listen, it's the Locked On NBA podcast. The offseason doesn't stop, so all the biggest rumors, biggest stories, we are covering it over at the Locked On NBA podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Jordan Hawkins, I had a couple of y'all ask me about him. Please throw questions, things you think would be good shows, good segments here in the comments down below. Jordan Hawkins, really limited last season, 56 games due to injuries here. And you saw that really just actively harm him. 11 points per game, but he shot just 33.1% from three, which just isn't going to get it done, really isn't good enough. You know, what's his role going to be next season? And I think that's an open question. We're seeing that Joe Dumars, Troy Weaver don't really love some of the players on the roster. And Jordan Hawkins was drafted under the old regime. You know, has the ability to come in and be a bit of a microwave scorer, a good three-point shooter off the bench. In theory, pairs really well next to Zion Williamson. But he just hasn't proven it at the NBA level just yet. This is not someone who's kind of figured out what his role is. And when you look at him, right now he's just a one-dimensional player. He shoots threes. That's about it. And he's not shooting threes particularly great. He plays a little bit bigger than you would think from him. He can dunk. He can definitely dunk. But that's not the skill you need from him at the guard position right now, I think. This is someone who you need to be more than just a shooter, and he hasn't exactly proven that he's more than just a shooter right now. He is not good defensively. He's not a good rebounder for the position either. What is his role going to be? It's really going to come down to him hitting threes at an exceptionally high rate and high level. That's how you justify giving him minutes next season on this roster. You might justify giving him minutes because you don't have a choice, but he needs to be healthy, which hopefully shutting him down really got him healthy, dealing with a back injury that does concern me. But if he's coming in and shooting threes and hitting them at a 40% plus rate, that's what he needs to be. Otherwise, you know, while I'm not a big Jaden Ivey guy, and he's coming off that big injury that really limited him last season too, you know, Ivey is someone who for his career or last season in the 30 games shot 41%. He was an end of rotation guy, but on a good team, that's kind of where he is. 17.6 points per game on 41% shooting from three is a pretty good number along with decent rebounding. I asked Ku Cahill from Locked On Pistons, is that someone a team should target? And he's like, he makes threes. That's what he does. That's all he does. I don't think he's a particularly buy low candidate. I think he's going to be heavily in the rotation for the Pistons next season, so I don't know if he's really attainable at a price that New Orleans would want to give to get him. But I do think, you kind of view him and Jordan, or I view him and Jordan Hawkins kind of together in the same kind of bucket, right? Why go get Jaden Ivey when you have Jaden Ivey at home in Jordan Hawkins? Particularly because Ivey's making about $10 million this year and is due for a new deal coming up soon. I'd rather just see what you have in Jordan Hawkins with it. This team needs more shooting. They're lacking that there, and they're going to really try and make up for that lack of shooting by living at the free throw line and playing downhill aggressive and scoring at the rim. And maybe you get enough three-point shooting from guys like Jordan Poole, Trey Murphy, and others too. So you need Hawkins and his three-point shooting to really develop. The problem with that is, like, Willie Green clearly doesn't have a lot of trust in Jordan Hawkins. His minutes have been a roller coaster. It's been up and down what his role is going to be. And is this the type of player that's going to start playing scared like we saw with Dyson Daniels, thus hurting his development a little bit? And I do think there is some potential for that. You know, before deciding on going after a Jaden Ivey or another three-point shooter, what all this is to say is the Pelicans need to figure out what they're doing with Jordan Hawkins first, because that's the guy that you have that has a lot of potential to be a really great movement shooter, moving, catching the ball, turning, squaring up, letting the shot rip, and having it fall, which is perfect around Zion Williamson. You need an offense that lets him do that, where you're not just kind of standing him there. You need to let him move and roam and relocate and cut and all of those things. If the Pelicans can do that, they can really find a role for him. But if not, that's looking like another part of the roster that's going to eventually get massively turned over by Joe Dumars, by Troy Weaver, and the rest of this new Pelicans front office. So it's going to be interesting to see what they're planning on doing there with Jordan Hawkins. But I wouldn't be going after Jaden Ivey at that price coming off the injury and knowing that Ivey just doesn't do anything good other than shoot, when you have a guy that can kind of do all of that for you here in New Orleans in Jordan Hawkins. Let me know what you think about Hawkins' potential future in the comments down below on YouTube. And again, don't forget, watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Maybe the Pelicans get creative with that traded player exception. Let me know what you think about Antonio Reeves going elsewhere. I think it's just like a whatever kind of move, and I'm sure the Pelicans can get equal production elsewhere, even though Reeves would have been potentially cheaper than anybody else. But if you can get someone that plays better than Reeves, kind of fits in, and this team is not totally about development right now. Certain guys, yes, fear's queen, but you also got to make the playoffs next season. So I think they're looking for someone who they feel is going to help them do that a little bit more. Let me know in the comments down below, and that's it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. See y'all tomorrow.